Hello and welcome to Spy Hard's podcast, where your hosts go deep undercover into the world of spy movies to decipher which films make the knock list. I'm Captain Scott.
And I'm Lieutenant Cam the Provocateur. And Scott, chaos is my friend with benefits.
Are you going to make out with it a little?
I guess. I guess that's what I'm going to do. I don't know.
I'd be scared of what you might catch.
More chaos?
A venereal disease. It might be named S31. Who knows?
Okay.
Well, I guess this is the inaugural episode of Trek Cards, right?
I guess so. Obviously, Trek has worked its way into the podcast many times over the years because Scott and I met famously at a Star Trek convention. Famously.
Yeah.
Underlined.
There were banners. There were like streamers.
Yeah.
Photographers were there. It was great.
Yeah. And we often will reference, character actors who appear in spy films and note that they appeared in a random episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation or the original Star Trek or something like that.
Which everyone loves. Let's keep doing.
It's the classic red alert moment of the show. Our first interview was Nicholas Meyer, who, of course, wrote and directed Star Trek II and Star Trek VI, and wrote Star Trek IV. So definitely there's some Star Trek DNA baked into the Spy Hards concept from day one.
Yeah, and there's been like alternate titles for this show. Horse Hards over the years. I can't remember.
That's about it.
Well, I always joke about soy hards because the amount of times I've written soy hards instead of spy hards. So I think there's going to be a soy episode at some point.
I have done the same thing when I'm typing it into my phone. I have auto-corrected it to soy hards so many times.
Like I feel like there's an insult in there. Like, oh, look at these soy hards. These beta soy hards over there.
What's the movie we're reviewing that gets that kind of response?
Oh.
Yeah, it's got to be something that's showing up probably on YouTube that someone's going to leave a comment.
John Voight? Anyone?
Maybe that's an ambassador to Hollywood now. Careful who you pick on. But maybe if we are having a video that has something complimentary to say about No Time to Die, that might get a Soy Hards response.
Oh, like we like compliment Lashana Lynch's acting, and we're like, oh, look at these soys over here.
Exactly, or we say something nice about just the overall film in general. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've gotten a lot of flack over the years for having our things that we liked about No Time to Die. I think the cool thing is to dump all over it, but that just feels like low-hanging fruit to me.
I don't really work in extremes. Things are rarely 100% bad or 100% good. Rarely. But
foreboding.
Yeah. But in a case like No Time to Die, there's plenty of good mixed into the issues I have with the movie.
And so one of the other things that's been floated around is Trek cards. I did a April Fool's Day last year where I turned this into Trek cards for the day. I quite enjoyed doing that, made a logo and everything.
Yeah, that was the day I quit the show.
Yeah. Cam has actually been replaced by AI since then.
And no one noticed.
No. It's actually gotten better.
No kidding.
Our numbers have shot up.
The Union was the first episode that was AI hosted.
Ironically, also acted and written by AI.
Oh.
But yeah, so this is the film we're about to talk about has been on our radar for quite some time, but it is a genuine Star Trek spy movie.
Yeah.
Like, we're not reaching for it. Like, it is.
And it's also, the inaugural streaming Star Trek film to come out of Paramount Plus. And yeah, it just happened to tie very closely into our interests of both Trekdom and the spy world.
Yeah. So I think without further ado, Cam, what are we talking about?
We are tackling 2025's Star Trek Section 31. This was actually the first movie I saw that was released in 2025. It beat The Wolfman by a day and a half.
And we'll get to feelings in a bit.
Yeah.
Is that going to soil your 2025 listings on Letterboxd? That it was started by this?
No, I think 2025 hopefully is uphill.
Well, it wasn't theatrically released, so you can kind of like
Yeah,
You can kind of
so
play with it that way.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Wolfman was fine, not great, but it had some interesting elements, so I can feel good about my first theatrical experience being Wolfman.
Mm. And look, I mean, this film does this streaming film or streaming release, whatever you'd like to call it, does have some ties into the TV show Star Trek Discovery.
Boy, does it.
But I wouldn't say it's necessary reading.
No, I would say that like if you watch the show, you might feel some investment towards the film, maybe a
Mm.
little. Um, but the movie will probably still play if you haven't seen the show. You just won't care as much, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. I'm just adding this in because a lot of people will tune in for the first 5 minutes, be like, "Oh, I haven't seen this film," so I think like, "Oh, I haven't seen the show." If you're interested in checking out the film, I don't think you need to do the previous reading, and if you still want to check it out by the end of this episode, I think you could just jump on Paramount Plus and do that.
Yeah, the movie gives you enough backstory via exposition that you won't be lost. You just won't have the actual experience of having seen these events.
No, exactly. But if you're unfamiliar with Star Trek Section 31, here is your synopsis.
Wait, prediction. It's like super generic, right? Like they don't want any details in the synopsis?
Yeah, oh, it's spot on generic.
Okay.
Here you go. And to be fair, it's actually incorrect.
Oh, even better.
Star Trek Section 31. To protect the light, they fight in shadow.
Yeah.
Emperor Philippa Georgiou joins a secret division of Starfleet tasked with protecting the United Federation of Planets and faces the sins of her past.
That's more or less true, but it's also like
Yeah.
trying to stop a super weapon, basically.
Yeah. The sins of the past thing is actually, I suppose the super weapon is the sins of her past as well as the big bad.
It is. It's all tied to her past, so I think that actually lines up. But yeah, it is like a, kind of classic spy blockbuster, a MacGuffin hunt. There is a deadly
Yep.
weapon and they have to stop it.
Yeah, there's plenty of Mission Impossible films that are based around this sort of thing. Spy Kids films have had the same sort of story. I could probably chart you numerous spy films that have had this basic premise.
Yeah, James Bond for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. We can't talk about first experiences, I suppose, too much, but we can talk a little bit about my experience going to the premiere.
Yeah.
Yes, I went to the premiere of the film a couple of days before it was released so we could record this, and we've been sent screeners as well. And Cam has actually spoken to some of the cast members.
Yes, I interviewed Kacey Rohl, who plays Rachel Garrett, and Humberly González, who plays Mel in the film, a Deltan alien, for those that know their Star Trek. I talked to the two of them on the press junket for the film, and so we'll be releasing that on Friday.
And I'll, on Friday, go into a little bit more depth about what happened at the press screening. Michelle Yeoh and Rob Kazinsky were in attendance. They did a Q&A afterwards. We might share a few clips from that as well. And I'll just talk more about the experience. But just as a sort of overall thing, I went to the screening here in London and just got to sort of hang out with a bunch of Trekkies and a lot of influencers. That was a very, very odd experience dealing with influencers. I've never done that before.
It was really weird that Tommy Lee Jones was there asking everyone about their reach.
Yeah. And to be fair, he was quite impressed with my reach. No, sorry, my reach around.
Oh, Jesus.
That's the kind of humor you can expect every week here at Spy Hards. Yeah, so an interesting experience, but I got to see a Q&A. I sat basically in front of Michelle Yeoh and heard her talk about the film a little bit. So yeah, that was an interesting experience. But Cam and I saw this as digital screeners, but I've also seen it on the big screen as well.
Yeah.
So I have had both experiences. This isn't being released theatrically at all. This is literally just coming to streaming. So very rare, I think, that anyone got to see it on the big screen.
Yeah, I mean, definitely very rare. So yeah, that's very lucky for you. And in the past, there have been like Trek straight to say Blu-ray films. Like there was a documentary on Deep Space Nine that played theatrically. I got to see that in theaters, a one night only event.
Me too.
And that may happen coming up
Yeah.
with a Voyager documentary as well. We'll see. But yeah, it's kind of few and far between these opportunities to see these kind of exclusive streaming or Blu-ray films, as they weren't meant to be seen, but you get the bonus of seeing them on the big screen.
Yeah, I don't think it did anything to influence my opinion seeing it on the big screen. I'll just tell you now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would just say there was an open bar. So I popped out a couple of times.
Were they serving Romulan ale?
They were.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, it was the blue liqueur with vodka and sparkling soda, I think. But it actually went down a treat. I had about 4 of them.
They had to carry Scott out of the Section 31 screening.
Misfits.
You got to give context for that.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's fair. There is the marketing campaign for this. Well, I think Cam will probably get into it behind the scenes. Was interesting for this, and there was I think on the teaser trailer that dropped in the summer last year. Actually, when Cam and I were in Vegas at the Star Trek convention, I think it dropped around about then, and it had like a warning at the front, like warning: this trailer contains Delton pheromones and misfit action. And I think Cam and I and our friends all just attached to the word misfits
Yeah.
to this film. And I think then later in the year there was a press, I think it was at like Comic-Con or something. And they had the cast there, and one of the person doing the interviews asked the cringiest question in the world of like, why is your character a misfit?
Yeah. Yeah. They were really doubling down on the misfit buzzword for this film, and it felt at the time like a very conscious attempt to ape the success of Guardians of the Galaxy.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's in the DNA of this film.
It is, and by intention, yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've got so much to say about this film, and I feel like I kind of want to get into it, but I know we like to go through the backstory, so, and I could fill all this with a bunch of Star Trek puns, but I kind of want to know what you have learned about the backstory, because I know things about how this film came to be, but you're much better at research than I am.
Right. So, there's obviously
I like how you just acknowledged that was correct, by the way.
right. Yes. No, that's correct.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You're the
Moving on.
misfit, and then I'm the scholar.
You're the godsend, right?
That's right. So the DNA of what this movie is goes back a long ways to about the year 2017, maybe even 18. Probably more like 2017. So like this is a movie that is about 8 years in development to happen, which is kind of shocking, I think, for a lot of people who might come across it, just on their streaming when they're looking at Paramount Plus and going, oh, they must have just put out a Star Trek movie. This thing has honestly been developed for a long time. And It was actually a Michelle Yeoh idea because she was cast in a recurring role in the first season of Star Trek Discovery, which was the first big Star Trek show to come out of CBS All Access, which would later become Paramount Plus. And they decided to use Star Trek as a entry point for their streaming service and bring people in by making it a streaming exclusive. You could not watch it on TV, except in Canada. You had to sign up for CBS All Access. And so Discovery launches. Michelle Yeoh is playing a recurring role, and she approached Alex Kurtzman, the overseer of the Star Trek franchise for Paramount, to perhaps come up with some ideas to give Giorgio her own show. She really loved the idea of this character and wanted to do more with it. And I found a quote from her about why she wanted to do this. She said, "I know that there are a lot of young women who grew up like I did and did not see somebody like me on the screen, and I want to be that person." And so that's kind of something Star Trek has specialized in from day one. You go back to like 1966 and you have Uhura on the bridge. So I can understand why
Chekhov as well.
Chekhov as well in season 2. I can understand why Michelle Yeoh sees that, and it's very appealing to her and sees the opportunities that Star Trek affords that maybe another franchise wouldn't.
No, I mean, you're completely right. I mean, even Sulu as well. It was Star Trek has been breaking boundaries since day one. Something people often forget. I remember during the marketing for Star Trek Discovery, they were like, "Oh, it's the first like black lead."
Yeah.
A lot of the time, I was like, whoa, Captain Sisko and Deep Space Nine, folks. They like to forget a lot of stuff. I think just the media just likes to forget. I mean, it had the first on-screen interracial kiss with Kirk and Uhura in season 3. Is that Bread and Circuses?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was a pull. That was a pull. And I mean, we're nerds here, folks. It's what we do. And so they've been pushing boundaries since they ought. So I completely understand from that perspective why Michelle would feel why she wants to have representation on the screen. The question I have about her push is if because something that happens in I don't want to get into too much detail because it doesn't really matter. But Captain Giorgio, Michelle Yeoh's character was originally a part of the Prime Universe, whatever you want to call it, and she was a captain in Starfleet.
Mm-hmm.
And then she's killed.
Yeah, in the second episode of Star Trek Discovery, yes.
Right. And then for a lot of people, we thought, oh, that was it. And then she turns up later in the series as her mirror universe version. Now, for those who are not, up in their Star Trek, a mirror universe character is basically your evil counterpart. So this whole like you wear a goatee if your evil joke comes from in shows like Community comes from Star Trek, the mirror universe episodes. And so she was the mirror universe version, the evil version, and she was the emperor, which is why I mentioned emperor earlier, of the evil empire in the mirror universe. And she was slaughtering and killing and maiming. And so my question is, how is that positive?
Well, I mean, Michelle
Kids,
Yeoh,
you could be anything. You could be an emperor.
I'm trying to look at it from the point of view of Michelle Yeoh, though, because it's like, how often did she get to play big, broad, campy, fun action characters like someone like Giorgio, who's very dynamic on screen in that mirror universe version? Like, they bring her over to the main show, and she's like stealing scenes every single time.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, in 2017, 2018, not so much. Now, she's in one of the leads in Crazy Rich Asians. She's one of the leads in Wicked, where she's going big with that performance.
Yeah,
Everything, Everywhere, All at Once was her Oscar-winning performance, and she's playing all sorts of versions of herself in that film.
Mm-hmm.
So I think since then it's definitely allowed her. Maybe Discovery was quite important for her in terms of her career.
I think it is crucial to the resurgence of Michelle Yeoh in pop culture.
Isn't that crazy? Like I have no time for Star Trek Discovery. I'll say that now. For those who are listening who actually might like that show, all the power to you. I know Cam is a fan of some of the early stuff.
Yeah, seasons 1 and 2 have their pluses.
I would throw it all in the bin and delete it if I could personally. But that's just my taste.
Right.
I mean, I did spend an inordinate amount of money to take photos of some of the cast years ago. I think that's when I knew less.
Sure. Yes, you don't want to know how much money, folks.
You don't. You really don't. Cam and I shared a lot of those photos, to be fair.
That's true.
There's a pretty nice one of, was it me and you with Mary Wiseman, or is it me and a friend with Mary Wiseman?
No, I did that one by myself.
Okay, we did a Charlie's Angels pose together, that was why.
Right.
Okay. But yeah, so I can understand, like, where Michelle's coming from with that one, but I also just question, like, it's not a positive role model. The Emperor Philippa Giorgio is not a positive role model.
Right, and that's something Star Trek has always been very big on, is positive role models. So that did feel a little at odds with the overall franchise aim. But so this was kind of like, discussed with Alex Kurtzman, and they started teasing more Michelle Yeoh in Star Trek in June of 2018 at New York City Comic Con. And they were like, who loves, the character of Giorgio? You're going to be seeing a lot more of her. And then at the end of that year, Deadline reported that Michelle Yeoh was in official talks for a Section 31 series. And so that was where it was confirmed Section 31 was going to be developed. And for those who weren't aware, Section 31 is a spy agency which is created in the series Star Trek Deep Space Nine that has since then popped up on Star Trek Enterprise, as well as actually the the Chris Pine films.
Yeah, it's kind of the. I mean, for those who we could spend a while getting into the minutiae of Star Trek. Starfleet is kind of where you think of the Enterprise and things like that. That's the Navy of space in Star Trek, and they have their intelligence agency, which is Starfleet Intelligence. But there's a darker agency within, much like they have a lot of, or they say they have a lot of, like, spy movies. You'll see, like, there's MI5 and MI6, and there's something else that's darker and deeper and doesn't play by the rules. 355, stuff like that. Like, they're like organizations within organizations that you don't know about. Treadstone, stuff like that. That's what Section 31 is. It's an off the books Black Ops organization.
Yeah, and it's viewed very negatively when it's first created, and has a little more of the kind of the darker John le Carré
Mm-hmm.
sort of approach, but over the years has become more of almost like a James Bondian thing.
I'd say more Mission Impossible than James Bond.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair.
There's not one protagonist. Section 31 seems to be sort of an amorphous plot, but it's also now it's become watered down.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, there's too many people. I mean, the biggest failure I think the show made with Section 31, just personally speaking, is that they all have badges.
Very true. Very true. Yeah.
I don't think James Bond walks around with a badge saying, "Hi, I work for MI6."
Although, to be fair, he might as well have in some of those Sean Connery and Roger Moore films.
That is a very astute point. Thank you. Maybe not the best point. Maybe I'll say Mission Impossible then. Ethan Hunt doesn't walk around saying he's a member of the IMF.
Right. And so Alex Kurtzman, at the start of 2019, started saying that the Section 31 show would be using the TV series Killing Eve and Mission Impossible as its primary influences. And it was going to be a TV series, an ongoing series. And so that was the plan. But by the end of the year, things seemed to be shifting a little bit, because then he was saying they had a writer's room assembled, but the series would be modeled on the Clint Eastwood film Unforgiven.
I haven't seen that film, so could you try and explain what a Section 31 show modeled on Unforgiven looks like?
Well, like Unforgiven is a very like gritty and dark sort of demystifying the West film.
Right.
It's the idea that there are no heroes. It's just violent and mean, and good people can just die in a heartbeat, and it doesn't matter.
The sort of film that John Wayne wouldn't like.
He wouldn't have been a fan of Unforgiven, I don't think. No.
No, I remember that. Like, didn't he dislike one of the ones from the 50s and got really up in arms about it?
Yeah, High Noon.
Or was that Gary Cooper didn't like?
No, Gary Cooper was in High Noon, and John Wayne did not believe in the glory of High Noon.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember that story, so that's it was just going around in my head. Thank you for clarifying.
But yeah, like gritty Western doesn't really line up with where we are in the finished film. You'd agree with that without saying anything in terms of its quality.
It's night and day.
Yeah. So that's kind of where they're looking at that point in time when they're looking at this TV series. And
that's more interesting to me. That is more interesting to me. Like, if you're going to do a spy show, I think you go the grittier route. I think that's. I don't think I would have been interested in it either way.
Yeah.
But had they done that, I think it might have worked better.
Well, it would have shown interest in exploring like a concept versus being more of a razzle-dazzle action show.
And also just sort of delving deep into the actual like reasons behind what they're doing and the sort of problems it causes.
Yeah.
As opposed to just that sort of Star Trek template of going to a planet, effing stuff up and then moving on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so Alex Kurtzman said they had a writer's room, and chief among the writer's room were Erica Lippold and Boye Yoon Kim, who were writers on Star Trek Discovery, who had been executive story editors on the first season and producers of season 2 and 3. And they had gotten their break writing on the Mary Queen of Scots drama Reign, which I never saw. I'm not really that familiar with, but they crossed from that into Star Trek Discovery. And so they were kind of like key figures in the first 3 seasons of Discovery.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were basically going to take over and run Section 31.
Okay, so they're in that Star Trek wheelhouse at that point already in the Kurtzman machine.
Yes, and if you look at the film, they have story credit. They do not have screenplay, they have story credits. And so they were developing this TV show themselves, and they brought in another writer, Craig Sweeney, who's a writer-producer, but he started out as an assistant on Dark Angel in the early 2000s, the Jessica Alba sci-fi show.
Yeah.
And
that was a fun show.
Yeah, and then he started like racking up writing credits beginning in 2003. Notably, he worked significantly on the TV series The 4400.
Oh, yeah.
Which was kind of a sci-fi show, and also the Patricia Arquette show Medium. He wrote several episodes of that.
I never watched it, but I know of it. I could intuit what it is.
And then later down the road, he wrote episodes of Elementary, the Sherlock Holmes reimagining, and created the show Limitless, which was produced by Alex Kurtzman.
Ah.
Yes.
My favorite person.
That's where the relationship starts with Kurtzman, and then Sweeney jumps over and writes the third episode of Star Trek Discovery and acts as a consulting producer on season 1. So it makes a lot of sense then to pair him up with the other two writers to put Section 31, the series, together.
It makes sense. I mean, there's a definite amount of churning in that Star Trek universe list of writers and directors. They all seem to sort of jump into each other's shows.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, like, you can see, though, like, this is moving pretty quickly from when they are actually officially announcing it to this point, which is in 2019. Things are looking good.
They just announced, I think, Star Trek Picard that year as well. So they only had one show on the air at that time.
Yeah. And so early 2020, the series has a shooting date. It's going to shoot November of 2020 in Toronto with an automatic second season renewal. It was not even a question. There was going to be a second season of this TV series of Section 31. And they were going to shoot both seasons back to back. And actually, the first season was set to air after Discovery's third season ended either early or mid 2021.
Okay. I'm waiting for the COVID-shaped spanner in the works.
You nailed it. Pandemic happens, and suddenly those plans become a problem.
I've never been so thankful for COVID-19.
Yeah, and so, wow. And so then you have the Star Trek Discovery Season 3 episode, Terra Firma, which actually sets up the spinoff. And Michelle Yeoh's character enters a portal to basically journey off into adventures that, in theory, we're going to continue into this series.
I am the guardian of forever.
What does that mean to people that don't watch Star Trek, Scott?
What did that show mean to anyone watching it, Cam?
Good point. And so at this point, you're dealing with a pandemic. The show's been pushed aside, and it just enters development hell. They can't get it going, and so it just kind of sits there.
Did they manage it at some point?
It's just sitting there. They are being asked about it. They say it is going to happen. It's apparently continuing on. They had finished scripts. They had a whole season written. And for whatever reason, they can't get this thing across the line. And so it isn't until April 2023 that Paramount greenlights Section 31 as a streaming film. And there were significant changes. The characters were changed. Shazad Latif, who was a cast member of Star Trek Discovery, was dropped from the show. He'd been set up to be a Section 31 member on the show. And so they were also going to initially delve into the temporal war, which is something that was set up on Star Trek Enterprise about a war between different centuries through time travel.
And don't worry, folks. If that didn't make sense to you, it didn't make sense in the show either.
That's true. It was very confusing on Enterprise, but the series Section 31 was going to delve into that sort of thing. All dropped.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, if we were doing a Star Trek episode, a Star Trek podcast, I would get into like what's the interesting about that, but no one cares. So, in the sense of like what that could mean to the Star Trek universe, so that I understand why that's dropped, because if you present an audience that's like a spy movie fan turns up for this film, oh, here's future guy in a little tube and Archer's talking to him, it means nothing, and it's very confusing.
Yeah, but if you watch the episode where Giorgio exits Discovery, it actually does set that sort of thing up. Like, you can see how she would be someone hopping through time at this point, which the temporal war would make sense.
Yeah, I'm surprised they never really addressed that whole Guardian of Forever exit in the film somehow, even with a thrown away line. There's just no mention to the last time you saw her.
No. So at this point, the focus becomes that the influence for the Section 31 film will be Guardians of the Galaxy meets Mission Impossible.
I think we need to take a beat for a second and acknowledge something that also happened during this period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, Michelle Yeoh went from famed Hong Kong action star and pops around in B movies in Hollywood.
Yeah. Yeah, like, because we talked about her on Mechanic Resurrection, for example.
Yeah. And that was like 2018, something like that, 2016?
Yeah, somewhere in there, yeah.
Yeah. She's she's on the third tier of the film. Like, she's not even the main cast. It's pretty embarrassing compared to where she is now in many ways, knowing how good she could be, or where she came from before, the caliber of stuff she could do. But in this period of time, she also releases Everything Everywhere All at Once, and that takes the world by storm, and she becomes an Oscar winner.
Yeah.
And that changes her trajectory. So I could see why in the sort of negotiation room, it went from, oh, we're going to take you for 12 months of the year to shoot 2 seasons,
Mm-hmm.
to, well, I know how long it took to shoot this, but a few months.
Yeah, and also Crazy Rich Asians comes out and is a
Mm-hmm.
massive hit, and she is a pivotal role. And at the time was a lot of people were surprised she didn't get an Oscar nomination for supporting for that movie because she was such a scene stealer.
She did great in that too. Yeah.
And she's also snapped up by the Marvel films because she shows up in Shang-Chi in 2021.
Yeah, forgot about that.
So she's getting bigger and bigger projects after Star Trek Discovery.
Yeah, but but during the gestation of the show, her career trajectory completely changed.
It did, yeah.
I mean, there was a discussion, I think, at one point of this being the first thing she does after winning her Oscar.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't turn out to be true. Wicked, I think, came out in that period of time.
Yep.
And something else, maybe?
Nothing that's jumping to mind, but I feel like there was something else, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like there was, but definitely Wicked came out before this, so it was beaten to the punch.
Yeah, she did some voice work in various things. Oh, and A Haunting in Venice came out.
Oh, that was it. Oh, we saw that together, didn't we?
Yeah. And then also, I mean, if it counts, she did a voice in Transformers: Rise of the Beasts.
It doesn't count.
It doesn't count. It doesn't count.
It doesn't count for anything. That awful film. So bad.
Yeah.
It's in good company this week. Oh, wait, that's a spoiler.
So, the production is supposed to start in late 2023. They are ready to go. And then the writers and actors strike hits.
Like, I don't believe in signs and portents, but like, did someone not just think like, is this just not meant to be here?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Like, if this is just not happening, maybe we should just let it go. Contracts are signed, money's exchanged hands at this point. Like, I get it.
Yeah, and so ultimately the film does shoot after the strikes are over, and the film is directed by Nigerian-American director Olatunde Osunsanmi, who came onto the scene. He released a short in the year 2000 and then began to work as a production assistant in TV before directing the low-budget 2005 horror film Cavern. And then in 2009, directed a sci-fi horror movie called The Fourth Kind with Mila Jovovich, which I actually remember. I don't think it was a massive hit, but it definitely was popular with a certain audience. And that sort of leads into him working in TV a lot. He's directing shows like Under the Dome, Falling Skies. He directs a few episodes of Sleepy Hollow, which was produced by Alex Kurtzman. He does some episodes of Bates Motel. And he joined Discovery for the 4th episode of Season 1. Over the series, he directed 14 episodes, produced 65, and became the supervising director of the show. Like, he was the one kind of important in maintaining the visual design of the show.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, he was a very big wheel there. And in the time since, he directed the finale of Star Trek Discovery, and is now a producer on the upcoming Starfleet Academy show. So he is very much working within the Star Trek universe.
Yeah, he's one of their bigger players, for sure.
Definitely.
I mean, I don't know. I can't speak to his direction in Discovery. I couldn't name you any episodes he's done particularly, but I also could barely name you any Discovery episodes.
That's fair. I think, like, Discovery often looked really good, and then sometimes looked kind of rough, and it was a real, like, kind of back and forth. We were talking earlier about, you know, seeing everything in extremes, and, like, the thing about Discovery was I had so many issues with that show, but they would have episodes that looked pretty good, and then episodes that did not look good at all.
Yeah, maybe that's just a lack of cohesion. I mean, I know they had a lower budget in their final season.
Yeah.
But Star Trek Discovery is one of those shows that I think it is very much a litmus test for what you're into as a Star Trek fan.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you like Discovery, there are ways you can go into Star Trek and enjoy it. But I think if you don't, there are other things you can like. I mean, not to say you can't like all of it. For sure, there are people that do that too. But it is very divisive and remained that way until it ended.
Yes, very much so, yeah. And a show that also, I think, was talked about a lot in its first couple seasons.
Mm-hmm.
And then over time, it existed.
Well, there was a time, I remember this, because, for me as a Star Trek fan, Discovery came out in kind of this sort of low period. I mean, Star Trek had been off the air since 2004.
Mm-hmm.
Star Trek Enterprise ended. And then you've got the 2009 movie, and then there's the subsequent two sequels. But there have been no Star Trek on TV since Enterprise going off the air. So having a new Star Trek TV show was quite exciting. And in the UK, they actually, on Netflix, brought the rights to and they helped to fund the first couple of seasons of Star Trek Discovery as well. And it was like billboards with Sonequa Martin Green as Michael Burnham on like all the major roads here in England. I was like, wow, they're really making a push for this thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think by the second, maybe third season, they're completely gone. And then they'd gone off Netflix by that point too.
Yeah. Like it felt like a very quiet crawl to a final episode. But just a couple of final notes, because I like to throw a couple of fun things in there.
Sure.
The Untold Story of Emperor Georgiou will be released as a comic book in February of 2025 by IDW. So, Scott, start staking out that comic book store.
Well, I mean, will you be picking up a copy for the show, Cam, giving us all a review that I'm sure everyone's clamoring to hear?
I don't think I will. I once did that for my Star Trek podcast, Subspace Transmissions. No one cared. So I will not be doing that again. And then, just lastly, Michelle Yeoh has said she is very open to doing a sequel to this film. If it is successful, I don't know what that means in a streaming era, but the director Osunsanmi has also said he's game to.
We'll get into how successful this film is in a minute, but the fact that Discovery lasted 5 seasons tells me there is an audience.
There must be, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think this is playing to no one, and I don't think this film will play to no one. And we live in an age where streamers don't release their numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Famously, recently, WWE has moved their main show, WWE Raw, to Netflix. It's been on, main broadcast television almost its entire life. And, people used to talk about the ratings every week and compare it to its competitors. But now that discussion's gone because you don't have access to Netflix ratings, and you'll never know how successful it is. It could be no one's watching it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I like to pretend that we're really famous.
Well, like we talked about the movie The Union,
Yeah,
which was a Netflix film recently with Halle Berry and Mark Wahlberg. I don't know, was it popular, Scott?
I mean, judging by the editorials or lack thereof, I don't think so. But
we have no way of knowing how many people just
No.
clicked play, because we only know about the online culture. Like, what about just, random family somewhere just clicking play, and they would never be online talking about it?
No. And that's why I think films like, say, Heart of Stone and The Grey Man probably did quite well for themselves.
Yeah, and we actually have a Grey Man actor in this film.
Do we?
Robert Kazinsky, who plays Zeph in the film, was actually in The Grey Man.
No way. He was at the thing I went to.
Yeah, there you go.
Perini. I do not remember that character. Sorry, Rob, I'll look it up.
Yes.
Okay, well, there's a little spy connection there, but... Shields up, Cam. Red alert.
Okay.
Let's do this. I think I want to go first.
Okay.
I grew up in a pretty rough house.
Mm.
I won't get into the details, but the only solace I found in that household was Star Trek. And I looked to it as kind of a reminder that it isn't all bad. Like, there's some good in the universe, in the world, and human beings, that they can be compassionate and caring. And, that things will get better eventually. And, I did get out of that household. Me and my mum and my brother got away eventually, and we're doing all better now, thanks. And over the years, I've seen Star Trek grow into interesting directions, and I often get the question of, like, why do you still watch Star Trek when it's tainted by this sort of bad origin?
Mm.
And I go back to the reasons why I watched it, because it means hope. It means that there is some good in the world. I've never once questioned that until I finished this film. I don't think the people making Star Trek know what Star Trek is anymore. I was genuinely just baffled and offended that this film exists. I mean, I wrote down Section 31 or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Alex Kurtzman. I mean, I'll just write down what I wrote immediately after watching the film. Perhaps one of the most misguided, amateurish, sophomoric, vacuous, unbearable, and frankly embarrassing film I've ever seen in my entire life. And what really hurts me deeply is that it's a Star Trek spy film.
Right.
Like, it's my two loves have crossed over and made a baby, and it's this pile of crap. And I kind of want to like throw in jokes or whatever and be funny for you all, but this actually has hurt me. Like I'm embarrassed that this exists.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to make that funny. I went beyond frustration.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know what to make of this. It's so misguided.
I have a question that kind of follow that up.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, you did watch, the first 2 seasons of Star Trek Discovery?
First 3.
First 3, okay. Do you see a major shift between what that show was doing versus what this movie's doing?
I feel like, yeah, I think there's still a tonal shift between that. I think this is like ratcheting up, like, the zany scale.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's trying to be wacky without actually being funny.
Yes. Oh, yes.
I mean, some of the dialogue choices are absolutely mind-boggling. And I'll go back to my point. This isn't Star Trek.
There's a Yo Mama joke that lands at the end of the film. Yeah.
There's a moment in the film where there's a song playing, and it's a rap. Which, I mean, I'm not saying rap is anathema of Star Trek. I'm sure they can coexist, but like, the lyric says, "Yo, she hit me up on my phone." And I'm like, this is the 23rd century. They don't have phones. What are you talking about? Why is this a thing? Who is this playing to?
There's a point where they're talking about a super weapon and the things it can do. And one of the characters says, "Does it come with fries?" Yeah.
I wish I could like drop funny like barbs to this in the sense of like trying to make everyone laugh while listening, but I have all the words and nothing to say at the same time. Like, I'm just so shocked by this film, and I've like spoken to some of the people I went to the premiere with in agreement. Cam and I have spoken briefly off at air, which we'll get into in a second. I'll throw to you, Cam, because I mean, just my top line, yeah, I just it feels they've like completely missed the mark.
Yeah, I was kind of stunned by this movie. And I don't want to like say that you can't have comedy in Star Trek. There's a lot of great comedy in Star Trek. There's a lot of clever lines.
A lot.
And Michelle Yeoh, actually on Discovery, was famous for getting a lot of funny lines that were memorable, and she delivered them just perfectly, and they'd get laughs, like genuine laughs. So it's not like you can't make a spin-off where you have characters tossing quips. It's that the fact the quips are really bad. They're like, it seems like they're written by someone who's never written comedy, or perhaps watched comedy, or they're watching sitcoms from the year 1992 and like taking notes and being like, well, okay, what's funny now? Okay, I guess that works.
Just watching like Jim Carrey films or something.
Pre Jim Carrey.
Jim Belushi or something? Or?
They're watching like, I don't know, like reruns of Night Court and being like...
Yeah. Actually, it can't be like Jim Carrey level of funny. It has to be like Night Court. Yeah, that makes sense.
Actually, the thing is, Night Court was actually a really funny sitcom, so that's a bad example. I don't know, like Empty Nest or something.
I mean, that doesn't play to me at all, but there's someone else that chuckled at that, so yeah, good.
Yeah, so, okay, there's always been an argument among fans. What's the worst Star Trek film? Is it Star Trek V, which was directed by William Shatner and features a search for God? Is it Star Trek X, or Star Trek Nemesis, which is the final TNG Next Generation film that killed TNG as a cinematic franchise? Is it Star Trek Into Darkness, the Chris Pine film that went a little too cynical, 9/11 truther kind of stuff that made people just kind of uncomfortable with what it was doing with Star Trek? I think the argument's over. Like, there's no question in my mind, and I say this not as someone who has a, like a just unnecessarily volatile reaction to this movie. I think this is easily the worst Star Trek film that's ever been created. And it doesn't even really have to do with its approach to canon or what it's doing with elements of Star Trek I might care about, like some of the aliens or things like that. That stuff's mostly okay.
Surprisingly okay.
Yeah, I didn't have issues there. It's entirely in terms of storytelling, in terms of writing. As I said, the dialogue is atrocious. The storytelling is wildly predictable. I had pretty much everything in notes written out before these reveals and twists happened in my notes. It's never particularly fun. The action is very poorly shot consistently, and this is an action film, and it looks unbelievably cheap and amateurish. And we'll dive into, I'm sure, some of the set pieces and things like that had just every checklist you could tick off for how to stage a bad action sequence. But, like, there's a part, and I'm just going to use a small little moment as an example, where a character is tied up in a chair, sitting down, and there's characters standing around them, and they're having a conversation. And there is never a moment where they cut to this character, and the character is Rachel Garrett, in a chair, where they are conveying that this character is sitting in a chair. You cannot see the chair. It is very bizarre. They will do a further back shot and show everything, and you'll see her sitting in a chair, but the eye lines aren't matching. It looks reshot to hell. It wouldn't surprise me if this thing was just completely reshot over and over and just cut to pieces, because it feels like it. But I was sitting there watching that scene being like, this is incredibly amateurish. Like, it looks like a fan film or a student film. Mm-hmm. This doesn't look like something coming from a professional studio. I have my issues with some of the Star Trek shows out there. Most of them look pretty professional, with maybe Picard Season 2 being the exception, which had a lot of pandemic-era issues.
But I would throw against that, and I'm not trying to derail your point, I want you to get back on it, but like, there are Star Trek fan films that look better than this. I would argue that the Star Trek Continues series, with like Vic Magonia as Kirk and stuff, is far better shot than this.
Yeah, and if they don't have a massive budget, because there have been budget cuts in terms of streaming services in recent years, because streaming is not the cash cow that people thought it might be. Mm-hmm. Maybe they had more limited resources than they had when they were shooting the first couple seasons of Star Trek Discovery, which looks sometimes quite impressive.
Sure.
Then don't try to stage wildly ambitious action scenes that you cannot pull off at all and aren't able to meet other films at the same level. Like, just don't. And ultimately, though, it all comes down to the thing that doesn't cost any money, and that's a script. And the script for this movie is dire.
Yeah, I'm just going to completely agree with you on that. I mean, there are some misguided performances in this film that I want to talk about.
Two that are egregious, and I was kind of shocked to see them in a, quote-unquote professional film.
We'll stop for a second then, because I think I think I know who you're talking about, but I'll take a guess.
Yeah, and I don't want to necessarily blame the actors.
I'm not. I'm going to get to what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But the characters, or the characterizations, I'm going to guess, was Sven Rygrok's Fuzz.
Yep.
The Vulcan with the robot in its head.
Yeah, think of the alien from Men in Black who had it was like a human body with like a little alien in its head. Imagine that with a Vulcan.
But badly done, with an outrageously terrible Irish accent.
Yes, incredibly grating. A character that might be like a, Guardians of the Galaxy one-scene joke character, just stretched out and made incredibly obnoxious, yeah.
And I'm going to guess your other choice is Robert Kazinsky's Zeph.
Yes, who's kind of the muscle and a mech. He's got like mech armor all over, and the mech armor looks... Oh boy, does it look cheap. It reminded me of...
Home Depot special, that was. I mean, I've seen people at conventions in cosplay with more convincing Borg things than he's wearing.
I remember seeing a screenshot of Bane from, I think it was the Gotham TV show.
Okay.
And it looked about on par with this.
I got to look this up. Hang on. Bane Gotham TV show. Oh boy. Yeah. Yeah. This is Bane from the Gotham T-shirt. This is pretty, but like, I mean, we can criticize the money spent on his costume. That's not really where the fault is.
No.
He's given some ludicrous dialogue to deliver, and he's directed to do it in this really odd fashion. And I think to bring home the point, what I was going to agree with you is not only is this script absolutely dire, I don't know much about this director. I can't say what his past work is like, but was he sleeping on the job for this?
I don't know.
Like, he was a supervising director for a TV show. He had to have some credibility, but the directors not only like put the film together and they like, they sort of envision how it all comes, but they like set the tone.
Yeah.
They set the pace, and all of that just feels completely off.
And I think about Guardians of the Galaxy, which you have James Gunn writing and directing it. He has such a specific voice and tone, and he knows how to direct his actors to achieve the voice in his head, basically.
Yeah.
And, they've tried to capture that lightning in a bottle in other projects. We've seen it with the first Suicide Squad film, where that movie went through a lot of production issues, but nonetheless, like, the character banter stuff did not really work. But it was trying to do a Guardians of the Galaxy kind of misfit team thing. And this is trying to do it as well. You don't have sharp comedic dialogue. You don't have a director known for comedy. I read out, what he's best known for, and it's a lot of science fiction and horror stuff.
Sure.
And this is something where I think of a key scene where it's our introduction to all the Section 31 members. And they're all basically giving speeches about themselves in a circle.
Yep.
About like, hey, I'm the tech guy and blah, blah, blah. And everyone's making like juvenile sex jokes that are just so not funny.
And also so not Star Trek, I'll point out.
Well, yes. And it's the scene of all these characters trying to sound like they're quipping and like really irreverent.
Yeah.
But it's so poorly directed that it has no energy. And it's a director who's not known for this sort of thing, trying to evoke a very specific director. I think of like the 1990s after Pulp Fiction came out, where you had all these directors trying to emulate Quentin Tarantino.
Sure.
And I mean, just about nobody did it. They never did it successfully. You had something like Usual Suspects, which succeeds, that is a Bryan Singer film written by Christopher McQuarrie, but it kind of like goes off in its own directions. A lot of people writing Tarantino dialogue tried and failed miserably, and that was what I kept thinking about listening to this movie try to evoke James Gunn.
Well, it's kind of funny. It's coming off of the heels of Borderlands.
Yeah.
Which also famously tried to beat Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, I was a fan of that, I think the third game I played.
Yeah.
And I eventually did see the film. And this film made Borderlands look not that bad.
Yeah, and I couldn't help but note that you had Jamie Lee Curtis popping up in a cameo in this film at the very end in kind of a Borg makeup as the, I guess, AI character that is controlling Section 31.
I assume she was a real person, but okay.
Well, I guess she's a real person. I don't know what she is. But Jamie Lee Curtis had a very bad stretch of sci-fi action comedies because Borderlands and now Section 31.
Yeah, I mean, that Jamie Lee Curtis thing I may want to come back to, but
yeah,
I think ultimately, and we'll get into the minutiae in a second, the fault of this film falls at the feet of the director and the screenplay. I don't know what they were going for, who they were aiming for, more specifically.
Well, and the thing is too, it's like we talk about Star Trek and, kind of the feel and vibes of Star Trek, and that's changed in, different shows and whatever. But
sure,
there is a consistent sort of concept to what Star Trek is. But I would say this feels more like generic space action movie more than anything. It doesn't feel like it's actually doing anything Star Trek-y. It doesn't have a great philosophy. You can say it's about a character having to revisit their sins and, what the journey of a life means and the baggage you leave behind. But, like, it's not exactly a grand philosophical concept that the movie is engaging with.
Nor is it taking time to deal with the ramifications of her choices. Particularly, it's moving on to its next punch and kicking scene to really do any time with dwelling or dealing with personal consequence.
Yeah, like, this is not a movie with, human characters.
No.
It's ultimately a very lightweight action film set in about 3 locations that it just feels like it's very superficial. And when I was watching it, it just felt like you could have taken the name Star Trek off this thing and just called it whatever, I don't know, like you could have called it Section 27 and had a movie about spies in space, and it could have felt the same.
Well, it's interesting because, when Star Trek Discovery came out, a lot of people said that. Like, it felt so far divorced from Star Trek that you could have just called it Discovery and not connected it to the universe. Star Trek Enterprise famously did its first 2 seasons as Enterprise, not Star Trek Enterprise, to try and draw in a new audience. And eventually they reverted back to Star Trek Enterprise because they realized they needed to somewhat cater for us longer standing fans and also, like, a lot of people didn't know it was a Star Trek show. I think this actually would have been better served if it had just called itself Section 31.
Yeah.
Because people will see it and be like, oh, it's Star Trek, no thanks. Whereas if you just go Michelle Yeoh in a film called Section 31, it's a spy film in space, okay, sure. And then, because this film makes attempts to tie it into the history of Star Trek. You have a character who's joining us later this week, Kacey Rohl, who is Rachel Garrett. Now, Rachel Garrett appeared in an episode of The Next Generation. She goes on to become the captain of the Enterprise C, but we're seeing her at an earlier point in her career in this film. Cam, can you tell me why she was involved in this?
She showed up and said it was a one-time deal for her to be helping them, and then by the end was basically being set up for an ongoing series of adventures. It like a lot of this feels like a sitcom pilot.
Not the practicality, not the plot reason.
But what I'm saying is, like, there's no character journey, there's no arc whatsoever. It's just like plot points.
No, it doesn't serve a purpose.
Yeah.
It's either to evoke a moment of nostalgia or to get people like me to go, oh, look, I remember that name, or like nothing else. But if you're going to bring up a character like that, do something with the character. Give it some, like, maybe make her episode in The Next Generation mean a little bit more with her actions in this film.
No, instead they just have the character, I think twice, maybe 3 times, say, I'm going to be a captain. One day I'm going to be a captain.
Yeah.
Where it's like, okay, well, we know.
Yeah, we saw the episode. Trust me, it's better than this film.
Yeah. And it does, like, expect the viewer to somewhat care about, like, Georgiou's backstory, but they, like, create a new character that had nothing to do with, the character's journey on Star Trek Discovery.
Mm-hmm.
That ultimately is the villain of this, and I was like, this is the villain you've built for your quote-unquote kind of irreverent spy action film? It's very heavy and weird and at odds with what the movie wants to be. Because this movie marketed itself as this kind of misfit energy, sci-fi action movie that's, like, full of comedy. And you have the characters quipping like mad, taking nothing seriously, acting goofy.
Mm-hmm.
And yet you have, like, a villain who is as tragic as it gets, like a very sad, broken person that has an emotional connection to your hero, that there's nothing funny about it. There's no quip about this character. It's very heavy stuff, and so it feels like it doesn't even understand the tone it's going for, which is, when I was watching the movie, I began to go, oh, the entire marketing campaign was because they had nothing, and they just had to create something in terms of tone with their marketing. But then when I'm doing the research, I see all these references to them wanting to do Guardians of the Galaxy, which means that, like, they were trying for something specific, but it feels very generic.
Well, I mean, this is a paint-by-numbers attempt at trying to do one of those buddy team-up films. I mean, it again, like I said, it made Borderlands look good in that sense. But they had... The thing is, here's a little bit... We're probably going to talk about this later in the week when we play if we do play some of the clips from the Michelle Yeoh interview we have.
Yeah.
But she dropped in that interview that it took them 5 months to shoot this. Now, bear in mind, this is like I think when you take the credits out and all the little bits of exposition that aren't really actual footage from a film, I think it's just under 80 minutes long.
I think it's a little longer than that. I'd say about 90.
Okay. I don't think that's true. I think if I'll push you, I'll say 85.
Okay. We'll settle on 85.
Right. But that is still 5 months, right? Now, bear in mind, Gladiator 2, I think was shot in like 3 months.
I just wonder, though, when she says 5 months, does she mean that it took 5 months, but it was interrupted by the strikes?
I can't speak to that.
Yeah, I don't know
but,
either.
I mean, even if that's true, that's still 5 months of shooting time. And so I have to think you were right in your concept earlier that perhaps this was just edited to ribbons too.
I found actually a note that they'd said it was just a hair under 2 hours.
At some point, they'd said that.
Yes.
Then they've lost. I mean, if we're going by the 85, they've lost 35 minutes.
I wonder if this thing was such a wreck that they just cut it down to 85 minutes to make it just a fast-paced action movie in theory.
I have a feeling it probably had to do more with the actual dramatic story of Michelle Yeoh's Philippa Georgiou dealing with her demons, and that doesn't vibe well with the tone of this team-up action flick.
Well, don't you think all of the backstory they show in this with the her basically being in the Hunger Games?
Yeah. I mean, what a weird way for an entire empire to pick a leader, by the way.
Yeah. Like the entire setup of that and dealing with this San character, it felt very like cut down to almost nothing, but it was so weird to take this villain who the movie is having no fun with. It is heavy every time this character's on screen, but then throwing him next to a cackling Vulcan robot.
Yeah. I mean, I can imagine there was a world where they shot more scenes of her as Emperor Georgiou in the Mirror Universe doing bad stuff.
Yeah.
Instead of just telling you that she did this bad stuff, they could actually take a few scenes to show her, like, decimating a planet. Say that she turned up at a planet we know, like, I don't know, Beta Z, and just blew it up. Now, we know the people that come from that planet, and viewers would be like, oh my god, that's Beta Z. She just blew it up. What an evil person.
Yeah.
And then she's dealing with the ramifications of that. And, like, you see her processing her demons. Okay, that's not an interesting light entertainment film, but it is slightly more true to the things that she should be going through.
Yes. And I mean, I guess like Georgiou and San go through character arcs, I suppose, in this movie. They're probably the only two that get character arcs, I'd say.
Does the Irish Vulcan get an arc?
No, because he doesn't really he doesn't experience anything. He just is, like the turncoat that they have to take down at the end. He's basically the secondary bad guy.
Rachel Garrett becomes a lieutenant commander, Cam. Don't forget that.
That's true, but doesn't really experience a character arc.
She learns to make out with chaos. What are you talking about?
The one that surprised me was Sam Richardson as Quasi, the shapeshifter, who I thought, given his billing, would just play a more prominent role. And he was a well-known actor from the TV series Veep.
Yep.
I really thought, like, okay, that's someone they're going to give a lot to do. They cut to him a lot, but he doesn't have any sort of character.
Shockingly, I always got the impression he was going to be the comic relief in the film.
Yeah, me too.
And he's not. I mean, I get the impression he might be ad-libbing from time to time. There's a few quips that he comes out with that feel like a bit more off the cuff.
Yeah.
I'd say he's probably the most naturalistic of the bunch.
Yeah, and he feels like the most utilitarian character, where it's like he's there to just kind of do what the scene needs.
Yeah, like he doesn't really get into any combat. He's just sort of standing around making quips.
But he can save people, because when someone gets knocked off that, flying platform, he turns into like a spider's web to catch them.
That's true. But not the actor's not doing anything though.
No.
I just found that interesting. But I guess the comic release doesn't have to be the action hero. But yeah, I thought we'd see more from him. Another letdown. We'll come back to dislikes. Let's just pivot for a second.
Yeah.
Because usually at this point in the episode, we try and talk about things we like. I'm going to struggle with this. But what I will say is, despite her not being given good material, I think Michelle Yeoh is still a star and tends to elevate anything she's in at least a little bit.
She walks out of this unscathed. Like,
yeah.
The movie may be trash, but I think Michelle Yeoh is very professional. I think, like, the character still clicks. She doesn't have the sharp dialogue she was often given on Discovery, but I think she walks out of this film just fine. I thought they were actually going to kill her character at the end. I thought they were going to do a Rogue One.
I thought so too. I wrote down they should have done it.
I thought they were going to, and that was going to be her way to kind of exit the Star Trek franchise because she's got other things going on.
Yeah.
And when they didn't, I was like, oh my God, seriously?
Like, yeah, it was almost a perfect way to write her out.
I thought so too.
She does the ultimate sacrifice.
Yeah, and then the other character, played by Omari Hardwick, as Alok Sahar. Exactly. I was like, won't miss him.
A lock of fun.
Yeah, not exactly a charisma bomb in this film.
No. Poor guy.
Poor guy.
They said they probably told them to be like act really like stiff, like there's a I don't know a broom up your ass.
Well, it's like someone who's trying to play kind of grizzled and gritty, but they can't inject any charisma into that.
Yeah, and there's no like wry smile from time to time. It's just like, no, I'm like the Tommy Lee Jones of this film.
And there's no like sexual chemistry between him and Michelle Yeoh.
Oh God, no.
No. And that's the thing is like Michelle Yeoh's character had a lot of sexual chemistry with various characters on Discovery. Like she was someone who was like omnisexual. She was just like a campy character who was the life of any scene.
Yeah.
And I feel like she's struggling scene to scene in this movie. Like Michelle Yeoh, as we said, like is very professional, pulls off what she needs to do, but I feel like she's struggling in a way she wasn't before.
But my theory on that is I think she knows she's surrounded by amateurs.
Yeah.
Like none of this cast are anywhere near the level of fame of some of the people in Discovery. I mean, much as if you like or don't like that show, it's fine. But, you know, Sneak and Martin Green had done several TV shows before doing Discovery, including The Walking Dead. Anthony Rapp was a big actor on Broadway. There's probably some I'm forgetting.
Yeah, Doug Jones.
There was Doug Jones. I mean, yeah. Hasn't he won like an Academy Award and stuff?
No, but Doug Jones is like famous for his work with Guillermo del Toro.
The films he's been in have won Academy Awards.
Yeah, The Shape of Water. Yeah,
that's what I mean, Shape of Water. Yeah, but like he character actor, been doing a lot of prosthetics all of his life, got a big name for himself. So he's got some charisma, and they work well together. The people in this film, I was hoping they'd pick them because they were like, you know, sometimes you find these rough gems and you sort of find something with it. You know, you find something with them and maybe they start their career with it. But this is no one's best work. Or maybe it is, and that's the problem.
Well, I've heard that Kacey Rohl, who plays Rachel Garrett, I just feel like this was a case of someone who's like a professional actress. Like she was in Hannibal for quite a while. Was basically given a role where there's just nothing there.
Yeah.
And so I go, okay, like I didn't think she was egregious. I think there's egregious performances in this movie, but she's not one of them.
Sure.
It's like people either fail to connect or they're egregious. And Michelle Yeoh's the only one who manages to, I think, make it out just fine. But I think for my what this did in terms of bringing back some of the classic Star Trek aliens, I liked that they went for some interesting choices. I thought they were visually pulled off well. And I was like, okay, that's kind of fun to see. Like, for example, there's the alien that's half black, half white in the classic original Star Trek episode. Frank Gorshin played actually that character. And we see
that be your last battlefield?
That's right, yeah. And so you have an alien from that species show up here. And I like the makeup update. It looked fun. I didn't really care that much with what they did with the character, but it was a cool visual. I thought that Humberly González as Mel, the Deltan, we've only gotten a Deltan in a major way in one Star Trek movie, and that's Star Trek The Motion Picture from 1979. And I thought they were having fun with the idea of a Deltan until the character was vaporized after 15 minutes.
Of all the people in the film, I was actually having fun with her. And like she was kind of winking at the camera a little bit. I thought she kind of got the tone they were going for. And yeah, they vaporized her in the first 15 minutes of the film.
It's like, imagine you were watching Suicide Squad.
Yeah.
And they vaporized all the characters that had like personalities and left you with like, 5 Rick Flags.
Or like Slipknot.
Yeah, it's Slipknot. That's kind of what this movie feels like. You're like, really? They got rid of the Deltan, the most visually, standout character? I thought that was an interesting choice, but I did like the visual. I thought it was well done. So like when it would do things like that, it just have a character who was very Star Trek-y looking, I thought it pulled it off.
Sure. I agree with you there. I think the people you mentioned were interesting enough. I liked kind of how they updated the Cameloid from Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country.
Yeah.
The first sort of shapeshifter we ever really see. No, we do see him in TOS, I suppose. I think was she shapeshifters in the original series?
Not in the same way.
No, but okay. So the it's not even a big baddie in Star Trek 6. It's just someone that Kirk meets in a prison. But they use that character again, and they've updated the way they shapeshift. It's kind of a cool effect, I suppose.
Yeah, we only saw that character briefly, played by Imon, David Bowie's wife in Star Trek 6. And
Spy fans will know her from?
No Way Out, of course. Yes,
Correct.
that's right. Yes. And like Sam Richardson, he's got the yellow contacts. He looks great,
Yeah.
and it's a fun thing to play with without like it's picking a element of Star Trek canon that's pretty obscure.
Mm-hmm.
And so that always gives me hope because you're like, oh, we can do something fun with this. The same way I thought with the Delton character, the bald Delton female character. I thought, oh, that could be kind of fun. And then they just kind of don't do anything, and it feels more like, okay, well, it's just kind of clothes dressing.
With the Delta.
With either one, really.
Oh, right. Yeah. It goes back to a bigger problem I have with this all the modern iterations with Star Trek, is I feel it has some level of contempt for what came before.
Yeah.
They want to sort of chart their own course, which I get as a showrunner or as a writer or as a director. You kind of want to, make your own memories. But there's a way of doing it whilst being reverent to what came before.
Mm-hmm.
And often these ones miss the mark, for me at least.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I feel the same way. Like, it was kind of like fun to acknowledge those designs and to see, these elements, but it's not like the movie was exploring them in a meaningful way.
Oh, I do have one more, actually. I think most people will agree with me. And that is that the film kills off the character of Fuzz, the Vulcan with the most offensive Irish accent you've ever heard in your life. So I never have to hear that accent ever again.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Red alert, Spyhards, we are shaking things up over on the Patreon page.
That's right, we are launching an exclusive new show where we tackle the exploits of the small screen's greatest secret agents, like Jack Bauer, George Smiley, and beyond.
And don't forget, every month you also get 2 Agents in the Field episodes where we decode the adventures of your favorite spy actors in their biggest non-spy movies. But Cam, tell the people what we have coming up next.
Now is the perfect time to jump over to the Patreon and catch up on the January offerings. I'm talking about reviews of Superman 2 and the Thomas Crown Affair, plus the 1990 Ian Fleming biopic, Spy Maker, starring Jason Connery. 2025 is off to a roaring start. Don't miss out.
So strap on your Condor Man wings and soar into the future with us over at patreon.com/spyhards.
But before Big O zaps us with a red pulsating laser, let's get back to the Spy Jinx.
All right, Cam, it sounds like we have some things to discuss in the dislike section. Why don't you lead us off?
Let's just talk about how cheap this looks. Because these locations, you do have this kind of nightclub that Michelle Yeoh oversees.
The emptiest nightclub you've ever seen in your life. Like, could they not have just afforded 30 more extras? It is... I watched this originally, the screener version before the premiere with my wife, who does the artwork for the show. You've heard me refer to her from time to time.
Yeah.
And she's not a Star Trek fan. I kind of wanted to put her in there as sort of like a canary down the mine to see how they get on. And I mean, she was not a fan. I can tell you that now. You don't have to wait for me to say that. But she noticed it immediately. Why is this bar empty? And there's all these ships parked outside this space station.
Yeah.
But no one's in it.
And you have a performer singing pop songs in this bar, and I'm like, she's playing to no one. No one.
Clashing against a different song playing simultaneously in the soundtrack as well.
I didn't get that. Yeah.
I did not get that. I mean, the thing that made me laugh, though, is those ships all parked outside.
Yeah.
It's like, you go to a resort, and the entertainment's so bad that you just stay in your room.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, this place is embarrassing. I'm going back to my ship. Screw this.
So that's location 1 we spend a fair amount of time in. Number 2 is the woods in Toronto. And one of the appealing things about Star Trek is going to strange new worlds. Alien worlds that offer you things that are eye-popping or interesting or colorful. And this is dingy woods.
Yeah. And they color it a bit brown as well a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And you just think,
ew.
Why have you done this?
Yeah.
I mean, it's cheap, that's why.
It's very cheap, and just you spend a lot of time wandering around those woods. And then we also get the villain ship, which is taken from Star Trek Discovery. That's the
just reuse sets.
Yeah, reuse sets from Discovery. You got a couple ships that do that. And that's basically
the garbage scow, I guess they have a little bit of that.
That's another ship, yeah. That's basically your locations, and then the one that's the worst, where I was like almost throwing up my hands, being like, "What am I watching?" Like, I'm used to watching movies that on this show we may watch things that are low budget. We may be watching like some like 1940s propaganda films or things like that that were shot real quick and easy, but like they rarely look like amateur productions.
Yeah.
And the scene that had me throwing up my hands was on this like floating platform going at high speeds down a tunnel.
God. Yeah.
And we are watching actors have a very poorly choreographed fight scene in front of a green screen tunnel that's moving past, and the whole thing is shockingly shoddy.
It reminded me of a when I was a kid. There was a show where like the kids would surf the web through like a telephone line.
Yeah.
And they'd be literally surfing on surfboards.
What show was this, Scott?
I can't remember, but it's in my head.
Yeah.
Imagine like sort of the Silver Surfer, but as a kid.
Don't do that to my beloved Silver Surfer.
I'm sorry. But like that was, and they would like travel between places, I think, but through the internet, right? That's the idea. It reminded me of that. And bearing in mind, this kids show, judging from my age, would have come out in the mid-90s.
Oh dear. Okay.
It was utterly, I mean, I think I mentioned unforgivable in one of my words earlier. This was, I know that may not have had much of a budget. I understand all these things, but don't get yourself in a position, don't write yourself into a position where you need to bring this action sequence to life if you can't shoot it. It looked terrible.
Well, like, look at an action film that didn't have a massive budget, may have had more than Section 31, but think of like Kick-Ass from 2008. They were like, okay, we don't have a ton of money. I think it cost maybe $50 million or something like that. Maybe less. I think it was less. So they're like, let's stage a hallway fight with really cool choreography. Do something like that. The Daredevil TV show on Netflix had like scenes in hallways or stairwells where you would have a fight scene that looked incredible because they would be like, we don't have ton of money for big CG action scenes. So let's pick a, confined location and just choreograph the hell out of it. And there's nothing here like that here.
I mean, frankly, that sequence on the sort of like hover things looks straight out of Spy Kids 3.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it does.
It's literally Spy Kids 3. That is embarrassing.
We needed more pogo toads.
I just needed Steve Buscemi to turn off and be like, yeah, God is ashamed of us. I would take him as a gratuitous cameo over Jamie Lee Curtis.
That's true.
But he has to be playing his Spy Kids character, though.
Yeah. I guess within the evolution of the show, Jamie Lee Curtis is a Borg who's taken over because it. Pardon it, folks. But on the TV show, Section 31 was run by an AI that went bad. And so they had to destroy the AI. So I'm guessing in this film, Section 31's been taken over by a Borg woman?
Well, I mean, if you want to get into the nerd,
yeah,
there wouldn't be an unassimilated person in Starfleet at this point because Starfleet haven't encountered the Borg yet.
That's true. So, okay, well, I don't know what's going on then.
Swing and a miss.
Maybe this is like tied to the Temporal Wars script where it was a character who was actually in the future.
I'm out.
Yeah.
I can't. I just can't. I mean, yeah, okay, you can maybe headcanon that into existence. I mean, to people who aren't Star Trek fans watching that, she's just got some metal plates on her head.
Yeah.
She looks like she's had a bad encounter from Superman 3.
Yeah.
One thing I think it was sort of a disappointment is it obviously wanting to go in the direction of Guardians of the Galaxy, but I think it also pulled away from what the sort of interest of having a Star Trek spy movie is.
Sure, yeah.
Like, if you're going to do this sort of clandestine operations inside of the Federation, that's a sentence, do something, use the fact that they're spies to make it more interesting. Like, there's not really any subterfuge, particularly in this film. They're not really acting like spies, they're acting like action heroes.
Yeah, I mean, there's some, I guess, heist elements.
Yeah, but that the Sting is a heist film. Okay,
Yeah.
Is this Guardians of the Galaxy meets Sting?
No. I will say there's a moment where like Michelle Yeoh's character goes like out of phase to dodge weapon fire. I thought that was actually kind of a fun idea.
A good idea.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah.
I thought it made interesting sort of fight sequences. They were traveling through different rooms, but you did get that sophomoric humor of stumbling into a room with an Andorian and then something else having sex. And I was like, okay, this is not what I wanted to see, but thanks.
Yeah, yeah. So like I was surprised that if they want to do Guardians or Mission Impossible, that they didn't kind of double down on having sci-fi gadgets that would be cool to see in espionage.
I suppose you did have like people having double identities.
You did.
I guess I could come to my own defense, I could come up against myself on that one. I just have to talk about dialogue for a second.
Oh, Scott,
I mean,
whatevs.
that's genuinely in the film, folks.
Yes.
Whatevs. It's been a big bugbear of mine over the years that the language of films has broken down. Around about the sort of people tend to blame like Buffy and Joss Whedon for this. I tend to blame more Marvel films.
It tends to be the most popular, and so like Marvel was mega popular, whereas like Buffy was more of a cult fave, so it's going to be less influential on the culture. So yeah.
Yeah. And so everything has to have a quip. Everything has to end with a quip, and you almost like it won't allow the film to take itself seriously. It has to undercut itself at every chance it gets. And we said some of the funny lines, and I'm probably going to end the episode on another funny line, but we're only saying they're funny because we think the concept of them being in a film is funny. The lines aren't actually funny.
Mm-hmm.
There is some awful dialogue in this film, grating at times, taking away that guy's terrible Irish accent. I don't think anyone. I think even Michelle Yeoh has some odd quips that don't really not up to the caliber she's been at before.
Yeah.
But it just Star Trek is at its best when it's perhaps a little bit stiffer. Like it should take itself a little bit seriously. Like it can still have fun. There are fun Star Trek episodes, like you said before. But
well, that was one thing that was a strength for Michelle Yeoh on Discovery, which was the other characters were a little stiffer, and so she got to be the one to undercut them at every turn.
Yeah. Yeah, and that can play it all right because you can then default back to sort of normal Star Trek, or as close as Star Trek Discovery could approximate normal Star Trek. This, I know they, and quite famous, not quite famously, I don't think anything associated with this film could be considered famous, but Rob Kazinsky, who plays the cyborg guy, never really explained what that suit is, to be fair.
Yeah.
A mech suit. What does that mean? Can you get out of it? What are the rules?
When they said it was leaking and they were following the like trail, I was like, "Oh, this is this is really cheap filmmaking here." Where it's like, follow the trail of futuristic fluid. I'm like, really? This is all they come up with? Not even like an energy trail?
Green, like the substance.
Like they didn't even have to pull out like some sort of like gadget to like follow some sort of reading.
As a note, did you notice that the tricords were basically just phones in this film?
No, I didn't notice that.
So tricorders, for those uninitiated, are like scanners in the Star Trek world. The little, like, you've seen them. You'll know what they know. They look like pop culture, but they use them to scan things. Spock always beamed down to the planet carrying a tricorder.
Yeah.
And they're usually quite clunky bits of mech. They do a lot of stuff. They do all kinds of wonderful things. Whatever the episode calls for them to do, they'll do. But in this, they're literally using smartphones. It's like, and this is set before. This is set. We didn't even talk about it. This is like in the timeline of all things. This is set before Star Trek: The Next Generation comes out.
Yeah.
And they're using these tiny little like smartphone gadgets. And okay, like I'm not going to get like too persnickety about canon, but there's something tangible about those tricorders and the phasers and all that sort of stuff that they had their own sense of cool to them.
Mm-hmm.
This is just it was a black rubber case on a smartphone. Just come on, like just try a little harder. But yeah, so like there's a reason why people especially in like the Next Generation and Deep Space Nine and the original series, they went through a lot of writers.
Yeah.
Because only certain people can write Star Trek well. They have to write to a certain level. They have to write a certain language, and that's an art that's been, I think, lost over the years, especially in these newer iterations of Star Trek. And that's something personally I take umbrage with. Not everyone has the same problem as me, and I genuinely found it hard to listen to some of the stuff in this film because I felt like it was written for children or idiots.
Yeah.
People maybe people have never watched Star Trek before. Maybe that's what it is.
I mean, when I was listening to that scene of them all in a circle explain who they were, I was like, this is hurting my ears to listen to. I don't think I've encountered a spy movie. I was going to say, like, there's characters who just annoy me at such an extreme level outside of maybe Franco and Chichio in Dr. Goldfoot.
You love those bread-eating idiots.
Like, that sort of stuff was really annoying. But, like, there was characters in this that actively annoyed me to have to listen to.
But it was the Irish Vulcan for me. Like that
was number one.
Whatever that version of an Irish accent was.
Yeah.
Abhorrent.
When that character's wife showed up at the end with the, like, southern accent, I was like, oh God, no. Oh God, no. Please, no.
I was really hoping he'd just turn bad again and someone would shoot him or something.
Yeah.
And then that'd be the end.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But yeah, like that and the mech guy, I just was like, I can't listen to this.
I want to take us to final notes, but is there anything else you want to mention in the dislike section? I mean, I have a lot of things I don't like about this film, but we said a lot of it at the top.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I feel like we kind of covered all that stuff early on.
Okay. Final notes then. Jamie Lee Curtis.
Yeah.
What was that about?
I think
why is that?
That's called a favor, Scott, because the two of them work together on everything everywhere. And so now you have her showing up to help her friend Michelle Yeoh in a Section 31 film.
That's exactly right. That is exactly why that cameo happened. I had not put that together.
Yeah. They both won Oscars.
I think you've solved it. I think that's literally it. I don't think Jamie Lee Curtis was itching it to get into a Star Trek streaming movie.
No, and I'm sure she shot that probably in her house.
Why are you putting these silver plates on my head? Oh, it's Borg stuff. Don't worry about it, love.
You're implying that they actually put the makeup on?
Oh, good point.
I think they CG'd it on.
Did she do it in bed?
I mean, I could have just been in her house on Zoom or something.
I'd love it if that was the case. Get that money, girl.
Yeah.
I'm all for it. Take Alex Kurtzman's money.
Go for it, yeah.
Yeah? Well, I've got a lot of things to bring up, but go on, you take one.
The chapter cards in this movie are meaningless.
Oh, God. They're like catch-up things for people who haven't seen Star Trek Discovery at the beginning. That's kind of what they're there for.
Well, like the chapter cards where it's just like basically trying to break the movie into acts, but like there's no real like shift in the storytelling. It doesn't. I'm like they're like trying to apply a level of pretension to this that just does not work.
No, it's as if it thinks it's better than it is, and it truly isn't.
I love the quote that opens the movie. The like.
I wrote it down. Did you write it down?
I didn't write it down. Go for it.
Oh, I've got it. I knew we were in trouble from this point. Like I'd seen the trailer, and then I see this quote: "Fate, who makes the sword, does the forging in advance."
Yep. Bye.
I didn't see who wrote it. I don't think it said.
It does. It's like I'm gonna pronounce it wrong. But it's Aeschylus, I think.
So the full quote is: "Fate, who makes the sword, does the forging in advance," and it's by Aeschylus.
Aeschylus.
Aeschylus,
maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. No idea what it means or why it's of any use to this film.
I mean, it's clearly talking about Giorgio and her sword of fate, but yeah.
Being the weapon, I assume.
Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of pondered. I found it funny to myself how many spy movies we've covered so far that have numbers in them.
Yes.
It's a very popular thing. 39 steps.
Yeah.
39 steps. 39 steps.
And that's all.
Yeah. That's the end of my anecdote, folks. Thanks. 355, Section 31. I was going to look through and see if I can find some more. I'm just going to quickly scan through our list to see if I can find any. But can you think of any off the top of your head? Does Cars 2 count?
Nothing with sequel numbers counts.
Okay, all right, that's fine. That's fine. That's fine.
Is there 3 Days to Kill with Kevin Costner?
3 Days of the Condor.
Yeah, there's a number of ones like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what the connective is there. I think I was just clutching at straws to try and find something interesting to talk about.
Okay, like the movie was.
Yeah.
Another point I had was that about the midpoint of the movie, they reveal there's a mole within Section 31. The complete inability to build any sort of tension about who it could be was jaw-droppingly wonderful.
Well, they drop it after like 2 minutes, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, more or less.
The sort of They could have hung over the film for half the film, like sort of Damocles. Like you just know it's there and it could fall down at any time. But no, they just completely lose faith in themselves and kill the Borg guy.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that was a bit of a hit, swing and a miss there.
Yes, it was indeed.
Well, I think like a lot of things in this film, they might have been trying for something.
I just think this, like, well, when you have a TV series, like a number of scripts that are being turned into like an 85-minute movie, I just wonder like how much was being tossed out and like what's really left at the end.
Well, it's sometimes things are just on the boil for too long.
Well, that's what I think, and also they credit the writers who were working on the show, so it's not even like they brought someone new in and were like, okay, here's the concepts. Can you like refine this into a film, because you're not as married to the idea of this being a TV series. And that's not what happened. And so I just wonder if there was issues there too.
The last thing I want to bring up is more of a question.
Okay.
I have been asking myself this all week, and listeners, I'm keen to know what your thoughts are too. Who is this film for?
I would say it's for people that mostly just would want to watch 90 minutes or 85 minutes of meaningless action, and it doesn't matter if the action is exciting or looks good at all.
That's a very specific subset of people.
Well, I think it's like someone who like comes home, turns on the TV, maybe a second screening, maybe is like on their phone, and they can look up every now and again and go like, oh, there's a fight scene, and that's about the gist of it.
Oh, they're making a joke about the pronunciation of the weapon that could kill the universe. Ha 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 ha.
Oh, or like, ah ha ha, like there's an Andorian sex scene. There you go.
Yeah, look, his antennae are erect. Ha ha ha.
Well, like it's not aspiring to hold your attention in any meaningful way.
No, I always say personally, I always have a lot of trouble watching films at home versus films in the theater.
Yeah,
like if I'm in the theater, my attention is 100% on the film. I found my mind wandering on the second viewing in the cinema.
Yeah,
so much so that, as I said, I popped out and got another drink because I was like, I just can't be bothered with this.
Yeah.
This is probably the perfect second screen film.
I think that's kind of its goal, really.
Do you know where this film's going to have a life?
It's not going to have a life, but where?
In-flight entertainment on planes.
Maybe. I just think this thing is going to vanish without a trace, more or less, after a week.
Well, that's why we're covering it immediately after it came out.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, time is here. Now we face the final curtain. Knock list, Cam, and I just want to preface one last time. This will never happen again. There is no other Star Trek film that is a pure breed spy movie.
Right.
There are one or two that are on the cusp. One that we might talk about at some point. This is really the only one that's, I think, ever going to happen.
Yeah.
In our lifetimes. And you and I met at a Star Trek convention. We both love Star Trek and we both love spy movies. This should be for us. So is it making the list of the greatest spy movies of all time?
I feel like you can't even ask that question given the preceding 90 minutes. So it's not a chance in hell.
No. Not for me either. I've listed the reasons why this fails as a film, and frankly, why this fails the franchise it proclaims to be part of.
Mm-hmm.
It's embarrassing, and I think offensive to the work that people have done on this series for 50 years.
There have been high aspirations, and we talked to Nicholas Meyer, who was brought in to make Star Trek 2 and Star Trek 6. At that point, if you want to run on fumes, You theoretically could, but with someone who saw a lot of potential in the storytelling and would take it in directions that maybe pushed against what maybe Star Trek fans were comfortable with, but did it in a way where he respected the storytelling and what you could do with that canvas. And this movie doesn't do either of those things.
Whenever you're trying to show someone something new, you're trying to introduce someone to, say, Star Trek or to James Bond or whatever, if you're introducing to James Bond, you wouldn't stick on Casino Royale 67.
Right. Yeah.
This is that. If you're trying to introduce someone to Star Trek, this is the complete opposite of what you should be sticking on. This is the film that you get embarrassed when your mum walks in on you watching it.
Because of the Andorian
Probably
sex
the
scene?
Andorian sex scene. Yeah, it's a no from me. And I think the the reason why I just said that about how important this film should be is because it saddens me to ask the next question.
Yeah.
Are we going to disavow this film?
I would. And I don't even care about any Star Trek connections, frankly. I would just be looking at purely from a storytelling, characterizations, dialogue, basically film craft. All the things we look at every single movie we tackle on this show, or any movie you just go with your friends to see in a theater, you walk out pissed off at the ones that don't deliver and frankly are lazy. And this movie is incredibly lazy. It feels it every second of the screen time. And as I said, it just looks like garbage. So what's my takeaway? This is not at an acceptable level.
By far.
And there have been movies that have made the disavowed list that may have been brutal to sit through, but at least we're hitting the bar of acceptability in a marketplace.
I can't agree with you more. I never thought I'd be in a world where I'm going to disavow a Star Trek film. And I would go as far as to say, to crib a term from Star Trek The Next Generation's episode Yesterday's Enterprise, I want this film to have a meaningless death. I'm going to Tasha Yar this sucker. Cam, grab the slide whistle and load the torpedo tubes. Bye-bye, birdie.
Yikes.
I think I'm gonna say this now. We might come back to this at the 2025 recap at the end of the year. This might actually have been the worst film we've ever tackled on this show.
Trenchcoat is a tall order, but yeah.
I feel like Trenchcoat was more coherent. I feel like Trenchcoat had a tone and stuck to it.
Yeah.
Didn't have an Irish accent like that.
No, that it did not.
Had Margot Kidder giving a great comedic performance.
A good comedic performance.
A passable comedic performance. A better comedic performance than anyone in this film.
I would agree with that, yes.
What a sad time to be a Star Trek fan.
Hey, I like Strange New Worlds. I'm okay.
I'm glad you have that to cling on to, if you'll pardon the pun.
Oof.
There you go, folks. Star Trek Section 31, the film that Cam and I had such high hopes for, is not making the knock list. The dossier on the film is complete and filed as classified. And frankly, it's so bad, we're disavowing that sucker too. Off it goes into the bin of the worst spy movies of all time, the pits, the dregs, the stuff that you pour out your window when you're, what's the little cup people leave out to piss in at nighttime when they're in the 19...
Jesus Christ.
Not now, but what do they call that in ye oldie days?
Like a bedpan?
Yes. This is the stuff that collects in the bedpan overnight that you throw out the window in the morning to the peasants below.
That's dark.
This is the worst. Literally. I can't... I wish I could eloquently tell you how disappointed I am. I hope I have over the last hour and a half, and I hope I've dissuaded you from perhaps watching this film.
Well, I don't know. Given that it plays on Paramount Plus, how many people will be watching it?
There are dozens of them.
Yeah.
Dozens! Well, that was a interesting moment in time. And don't forget, we're coming back later this week as Cam sat down with some of the cast of the film. I haven't even heard these interviews yet. I'm quite keen to hear what Cam said and asked. I can only hope that he mentioned some actual spy movies.
It was fun, and I will say that their picks for favorite spy movie, I don't think have ever been chosen. So that was kind of fun.
Interesting. Well,
Yeah.
there's a reason to tune in.
Yeah.
There's 2 interviews, it's 1 episode, but 2 interviews in one coming this way later this week. But Cam, we're disembarking from the USS Spy Hards. It's our first time aboard her, and frankly, this ship's in a bit of a wreck. But what's happening next week?
Scott, we are reuniting with 2 figures from Spy Hard's past. We are going to be tackling a Alfred Hitchcock film featuring Madeleine Carroll. We're going to look at 1936's Secret Agent, which is sort of a espionage rom-com. Not one of the director's best-known works, but I think one that will be a lot of fun to talk about.
Yeah, it's always exciting to go back to the world of Hitchcock and his dark and mysterious mind and see what he's put out this time. And yeah, we're going to go through all of his spy films over the run of this show. So we like to pass them out maybe once a year. So I'm glad to go back to it. And, I've heard this is a bit of a lesser work of Hitchcock. I've not seen it before, so this is the first time watch for me. But I think even at its worst, I don't think Hitchcock will be any worse than the film we saw this week.
Not a chance. Not a chance.
Not a chance. So your mission, folks, should you choose to accept it, is to head on back to 1936 with us as we team up with Alfred Hitchcock once again to review his film Secret Agent. And it also stars Spy Hard's MVP, I think from 2023, Mr. Peter Lorre.
Oh, boom. There you go.
What more could you ask for? And if you like what you heard on this episode and you could put up with our moaning and our geeking, come and get some more.
Yeah.
Because we do bonus episodes over on Patreon, patreon.com/spyhards. You'll be happy to know there's not a lot of Star Trek over there either. It's a lot of reviews of non-spy movies by your favorite spy actors. We call it the Agents in the Field series. I think we're coming up to our 100th episode on that series. We've got a bunch of film commentary tracks in the back catalogue there. And we now review spy TV shows over there. We heard from you all you want us to do spy TV. Well, you're going to have to pay to hear it because, frankly, we got to put food on the table, folks. And Cam keeps getting caught at Andorian brothels, and I have to bail him out all the time. So I do need some funds.
Fake news.
It's too much blue paint, Cam. That's where you're really getting caught. But seriously, come and join us over on the Patreon. We have a great laugh over there. Over 100 bonus episodes and some very low prices to come and join us. Join for a month and download everything and leave if you like. But just to show your support, come and find out more. You can even join as a free member and just sort of keep up to date on what we're releasing, any news we might be putting out over there too. So we'll see you over at patreon.com/spyhards and continue the conversation about Section 31. Let us know what you think about the film. Did you think it was disavowed worthy or not? We'll be continuing the conversation on social media at Spyhards, wherever one does media their socials. But until next week, folks, you'll find Cam and I partaking in a little bit of sweaty mecha boom boom.